Hi, I'm Vanessa. I drove 6 hours through fog and ice, holding a pumpkin pie I baked myself, because I still believed showing up mattered. But when I arrived, they didn't open the door with a hug. They opened it with a demand: pay $100,000 or get out. And while I stood there, pie still warm in my hands, I realized something colder than winter. This wasn't family. It was a transaction. They erased my name from the will, forged it on loans, then called me when the bank came knocking. Now they want help saving the house they stole in my name. What happens when your family decides you're only worth what they can take? And what would you do if your silence had always been their favorite tool? The road to Spokane was slick and ghostly, blanketed in fog thick enough to blur the taillights ahead of me into crimson smudges. I hadn't driven that far in years, not since the funeral. But I kept my foot steady, gripping the wheel like it owed me something. 6 hours from Seattle in a rented SUV with questionable wiper blades, and the only warm thing in the car was the pumpkin pie sitting in the passenger seat, wrapped in foil and hope. My hands were numb, I murmured aloud, but not from the cold. I pulled up to the driveway just before dusk. The familiar porch light flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the same cracked steps I'd stumbled over as a kid. Christmas lights framed the windows, blinking, too perfect. I stepped out into the frozen air, pie in hand, and took a breath that burned going in. I knocked once, then again. The door opened with the kind of pause that already made my stomach twist. My mother stood there in her apron, face neutral. Not cold, not warm, just unreadable. "Oh," she said, eyeing the pie. "You made it." I smiled, small, measured. "Yeah, traffic wasn't as bad as I thought." She stepped aside without another word. No hug, no welcome. Just the whoosh of the storm door closing behind me. As I crossed the threshold, I caught sight of Dad sitting in his usual recliner. He didn't look up from the financial report he was pretending not to read. He spoke without glancing at me. "Pay the 100,000, or get out." The words didn't land immediately. They hovered in the air for a moment, too absurd to be real. My fingers tightened around the pie tin. I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Callista's voice chimed in from the hallway, syrupy sweet and condescending. "You heard him. That's the family discount." My breath caught. I stood there, a guest in the house I helped pay off through co-signed loans and forgotten favors, holding a pie like it was a peace offering and not the last piece of dignity I'd managed to salvage from this entire trip. Dad finally looked up. "We had a family meeting. We're all contributing. It's only fair." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My jaw moved, but nothing came out. So I walked toward the dining room, each step echoing more hollow than the last. The table was set, plates arranged like a catalog ad, cloth napkins folded like origami, and no seat for me. One chair had coats piled high, as if it had been used for overflow without a second thought. I stood there for a beat too long before someone, maybe Aunt Janice, half-heartedly motioned toward a folding chair leaned against the wall. "Sorry, sweetie, didn't realize you were actually coming." I set the pie down at the edge of the table. No one said thank you. No one made room. I sat at the end, near the window, where the draft leaked in through the frame. And as the dinner began, the conversation picked up exactly where it had left off last year. Without me. Stocks, retirement accounts, the condo Callista was renovating in Coeur d'Alene, my nice job in the city. "So how's that paycheck treating you?" Uncle Ray asked, spearing a green bean. "It's steady," I said. "I'm managing a new audit portfolio." Mom jumped in. "You always had the head for numbers. Too bad you never figured out how to help your own." Dad grunted his agreement. "We just need everyone to pitch in. Don't make it a thing." "It's not a thing," Callista added, smirking over her wine glass. "It's just called family responsibility." I looked around. Forks clinked. Laughter rose from the other end. And it hit me, not like a slap, but like a slow realization curling under my skin. It wasn't a conversation. It was a setup. They were circling, aligning, justifying. I stood up, quietly, No one asked where I was going. The guest room was upstairs, still smelling like mothballs and old laundry detergent. The air was cold. The bedspread hadn't changed since high school. I didn't take my coat off. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my purse. From the inside pocket, I pulled out a manila folder. Not bulky, just enough to make a statement. Inside, a copy of the bank's audit report, time-stamped emails from my father's financial advisor, 2 notarized statements I'd collected over the past year. I'd brought it all just in case. I traced the edge of the folder with my thumb, then laid it flat across my lap. "They think they know what I owe," I whispered. "Let me show them what I know." My chest rose slowly. Controlled, not panicked. And for the first time in years, I felt calm. I hadn't come home to fight, but I had come prepared. I lingered in the guest room longer than necessary, not because I needed time to gather my thoughts. I already knew what they were, but because walking back into that dining room felt like handing over more of myself than I was ready to part with. Eventually, I stood, smoothed down my coat. I hadn't bothered taking it off, and made my way downstairs. They were already eating. The table looked the same as it always had during holidays. White tablecloth, mismatched dishes that Mom insisted were vintage, and centerpieces that had once meant something. The chair I had been offered earlier, the one buried under coats, was now cleared. Technically mine again, but still off to the side like an afterthought. Nobody moved to make space. Nobody paused their conversation. I slid the pie to the corner of the table. No one reached for it. No comments. It sat there like a guest even less welcome than me. It sat there, untouched, like an unopened apology. I kept quiet. If they were going to pretend I was invisible, I could play along. Midway through the meal, I slipped into the hallway under the excuse of grabbing a glass of water. Instead, I checked my phone. A notification buzzed in. Instagram. Of course. There it was. Callista's latest post. A carefully angled shot of the dining table with the pie in full focus. The caption, "At least she brought dessert." My thumb hovered. I didn't like it, didn't comment, just stared. A reply from our cousin Thomas blinked in underneath. "No seat but still sweet?" My stomach twisted. I took a screenshot, not to send to anyone, just to remember that even now, with all their years of practice, they still knew exactly how to humiliate me in the most passive-aggressive ways possible. I returned to the table slowly, willing my face back into a neutral mask. My mother gave a brief glance as I sat back down. The others kept talking as if I'd never left. And then, right as Dad raised his wine glass to propose a toast, Callista stood. "To family," she began, her voice honeyed with fake warmth. "To the ones who show up and the ones who pay up." A few chuckles followed. Uncle Ray laughed a little too hard. My mother's lips twitched. No one looked at me, except Delphine. My aunt, seated near the end, caught my eye. She didn't speak, didn't smile, just held my gaze with a look I hadn't seen from anyone else here all evening. Discomfort. Maybe regret. Maybe just someone finally noticing I was there. Even in silence, some people speak volumes. I pressed my napkin to my lap, breathing slowly through my nose. You don't burn the house down over one comment. You don't destroy what little is left of yourself just because someone handed you a match. So I said nothing. I smiled, tight and practiced. If they wanted to pretend this dinner was about celebration, I wasn't going to be the one who shattered the illusion, yet. Maya Angelou had a quote I lived by, and it came roaring back now like gospel. When people show you who they are, believe them. After dinner, I stayed back to help clear the plates. Or at least I pretended to. They didn't ask for help, and I didn't push it. The pie still sat on the table, untouched. I watched as Callista walked past it, phone in hand. She snapped another photo, this time closer. Our eyes met across the table as she lowered her phone, thumb moving quickly. Delete. She knew I saw. I didn't flinch, just looked at her until she turned away. I picked up the pie tin, slowly, and carried it to the kitchen. I set it down gently, next to the sink. No one asked if they could keep it. No one said they were glad I came. The hum of conversation faded as I walked back upstairs. In the hallway mirror, I caught my own reflection. Coat still on, pie crumbs on my sleeve. I looked like someone who had survived something. Maybe I had. I closed the door behind me. If this is their version of love, I'm done playing along. The guest room felt even colder than it had before dinner. Maybe it was the draft creeping in through the window frame. Maybe it was the silence that followed me up the stairs like a shadow. I eased the door shut behind me and sat down on the edge of the twin bed, the mattress creaking under my weight as if protesting the intrusion. The room hadn't changed in 20 years. Same yellowing wallpaper, same floral comforter, same feeling of not quite belonging. I reached into my tote and pulled out the small box I'd wrapped in brown paper and twine. No glitter, no bows. Just simple. Inside was a photo album I'd spent weeks putting together, prints from our childhood, handwritten captions, little notes tucked into corners. It wasn't much, but it meant something to me. I'd brought it to remind them, maybe remind myself too, that we used to be something more than this. Earlier that afternoon, while no one was looking, I'd placed it quietly under the tree. Not front and center, but nestled near the base, like a hope I didn't want to jinx. No one had touched it, not a glance, not a word. A soft knock at the door interrupted the quiet. Callista didn't wait for me to respond before letting herself in. She was holding a piece of paper, the smirk on her face already telling me I wasn't going to like what it said. "Remember this?" she asked, waving the sheet with a flick of her wrist like she was presenting a show-and-tell project. I took it. My breath caught. It was a photocopy of a handwritten note, lined paper, scrawled with blue ink. My handwriting. My signature. I remembered it instantly. I was 17. There had been a fight over a broken dishwasher, and I'd scribbled something, half apology, half bargain, to make the shouting stop. I, Vanessa Allery, promise to contribute to future home repairs when I'm older and earning. At the time, it had felt like a peace treaty. Now, it was being waived like a contract. "We're just holding you to it," Callista said sweetly. "You said you'd pay." "You're kidding," I said flatly. "Legally speaking, it's in writing." I stared at her. I was a kid. It was a guilt note written under pressure. She shrugged. "You weren't too young to get into college. You weren't too young to know what a promise means." There was a pause, just long enough for the hurt to settle in. I held the page like it was radioactive. Not hot, just quietly, invisibly damaging. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of it. I didn't say why. I didn't need to. "Whatever game you're playing, Callista," I said quietly, "you might want to consider that I'm not the only one who knows how to document things." She looked amused. "Vanessa, come on. It's just accountability." "No," I said, standing, the paper still in my hand. This is manipulation dressed up in family rhetoric." She didn't argue. She didn't need to. Her expression said it all. Smugness born of confidence that the rest of the house was on her side. After she left, I sat back down. I thought about the Maya Angelou quote I'd carried with me for years. Never make someone a priority when all you are to them is an option. I'd used it before as armor. Tonight, it felt like a warning label I should have stuck on every surface of this house. Later, I walked downstairs to check on the album. It had been pushed to the side, shoved halfway under the table where everyone left their empty gift bags and ripped wrapping paper. One corner of the paper was torn, like someone had kicked it accidentally, or carelessly. As I bent down to pick it up, Dad walked by. His foot landed squarely on the box as he passed, oblivious. Or maybe not. I didn't say a word. I just waited until he was gone, then picked it up gently and brushed off the dirt from the hardwood. "That was the last memory I wrapped for this house," I whispered. Back upstairs, I placed the photo album on the desk beside my bed. Next to it, I laid the manila folder with the copied note, the picture on my phone, and the envelope of bank statements I hadn't shown anyone yet. Then I reached for a notepad. "I am not your investment," I wrote. I folded the note and slipped it under the album. I didn't pack my suitcase yet. I wasn't leaving. At least, not tonight. But I was done pretending. They were keeping score, and I just started writing my own ledger. I woke up before the sun had the chance to climb over the pines outside the window. The room was still gray, still cold, still wrapped in that thin, uneasy quiet that followed last night's dinner. I could hear movement downstairs, coffee brewing, silverware clinking faintly, but no laughter, no music. Just the sound of a family operating like a business. Pulling on my sweater, I stepped into the hallway. As I passed the tree in the living room, I noticed the album again. Still there, still untouched. The lights blinked around it like a warning. No one had opened the gift. No one had even bothered to nudge it aside. It sat exactly where I left it. Quiet, unnoticed, irrelevant. Then my eyes caught something new. A canvas hanging just above the mantel. Large, glossy, professionally printed. It was a family photo. Last Christmas, it said at the bottom. Everyone was there. Mom, Dad, Callista, the cousins, even the damn dog. Everyone except me. The caption underneath read, "A complete family Christmas." I stood there a long moment, staring at the photo. The smiles were broad, perfect, and fake. I wasn't invited. I hadn't even been told it happened, but they'd framed that omission, immortalized it on canvas, declared it complete. The smell of coffee lured me into the kitchen. Callista was already there, slicing strawberries like she was in a lifestyle blog shoot. "Sleep well?" she asked without looking up. I opened the fridge and grabbed the milk. "Sure." She glanced at me then, eyes bright with artificial warmth. "We're doing brunch in a bit. Thought we'd recreate the photo, since you're here this time." She smirked. "Mom said last year was a lot more peaceful without all the big city energy." The knife hit the cutting board a little too hard for my liking. I set my mug down without drinking. She kept talking, all surface, no substance. Rehearsed lines that sounded like kindness to an outsider. But I knew the difference. Her compliments had razors sewn in. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Some things don't require a rebuttal. They unravel on their own. Later that morning, while brushing my teeth, I got a message. Group text. Subject line. Photo prep. I assumed it was from Delphine, maybe Aunt Janice. But no, it was Callista's inner circle. And somehow, I'd been accidentally looped in. "Don't worry," one message read. "She'll spiral like always. Let her burn herself out." Another chimed in. "She looks tired, like worn. That city job isn't doing her any favors." My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't delete it. I didn't respond. I took a screenshot. You never get used to being weaponized by your own blood. But you do learn to stop being surprised. I needed air. Out back, I found Aunt Delphine sitting alone, cradling her coffee like it was more necessity than ritual. She saw me approaching and motioned to the seat beside her. "I remember when this house used to feel bigger," she said softly. "Now it's just louder." We didn't talk about the messages, or the photo, or last night. We just sat in that cold backyard with steam rising from our cups. After a while, she said, "Not everyone who walks away is weak. Some just know when they're not welcome." I looked at her. That was the first real moment of comfort I'd had since arriving. Back inside, the house hummed again with the sound of fake preparations, mimosas being poured, jokes being practiced. I climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. Once in my room, I sat at the desk and printed the screenshots, folded them carefully, and slipped them into the new manila folder I'd labeled Timeline. It joined the rest. Documents, the fake contract, the financial statements, pieces of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to solve, but was now dangerously close to completing. If they were building a case against me, I'd file my own. Tomorrow, they'd smile for pictures. I was getting ready for court. Late morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains in the living room, casting delicate lines across the hardwood. It should have felt peaceful, light touching warmth, but there was a crackle in the air that told me otherwise, like static just before the strike. I stepped in, the room already buzzing. Dad was seated in his leather chair, leaning forward with a folder on his lap. Callista stood beside him, holding a printout in one hand and a smug smile in the other. "Oh, good, you're up," she said, turning toward me like she was hosting a webinar. "We were just reviewing some numbers." I didn't respond. I lowered myself onto the edge of the armchair across from them, my coat still draped over my shoulders. Callista began reading like a budget analyst on a podium. Food, $28,400. Rent, $12,000. College co-payments, $56,000. My mouth tightened. I'd heard these figures thrown around before, always vague, always tossed out like reminders of debts not formally agreed upon, but emotionally enforced. "Total," she concluded, flipping the last page, $97,320. We rounded it to an even 100. I blinked. "You rounded up emotional manipulation?" Dad didn't flinch. "We've supported you more than you remember, Vanessa. This isn't a punishment. It's reconciliation." I glanced at the color-coded spreadsheet she held up like an invoice. "I didn't realize love came with receipts." Callista shrugged, unbothered. "It's just accountability. You talk a lot about fairness, don't you?" My father reached into the folder on his lap, pulling out a separate envelope marked "For your records." That label alone was enough to spike my blood pressure. Inside was a copy of a home equity loan. I scanned it, quickly, sharply. My name was on it, not as a witness, as a co-signer. "I never signed this," I said, my voice flat. "You didn't have to," he said casually. "Your family. Your birth was agreement enough." The room spun for a second. I could barely process the words, that they believed them, that they'd say them out loud. "So you forged me," I said slowly, eyes never leaving the page. "Let's not dramatize," Callista interjected. "We've been managing things. This was just efficient." I could barely hold in the laugh. "Efficient? That's what you call criminal impersonation now?" She leaned in slightly. "We've covered you for years. This is just your way of giving back." Giving back? Or covering up? A dull roar began building behind my ears. The years I overlooked weird transfers, family decisions that never quite made sense. I hadn't wanted to see it then. Now, I couldn't unsee any of it. "You never saw me as family," I murmured, more to myself than them. I was just a name that passed underwriting. Their expressions didn't change. That was the part that hurt the most. By the time brunch was served, my appetite had vanished. The table was crowded with smiling faces and glazed ham and buttery scones, but I couldn't taste anything. I sat at the far end, phone in my lap beneath the tablecloth, scanning the loan document again. I took a photo, emailed it to Mia, my legal advisor back in Seattle, with a short subject line, "Urgent, need confirmation of forgery risk." Across the table, Aunt Delphine caught my eye. She tilted her head slightly, mouthed, "Need help?" I nodded, so small it barely counted as a movement. She reached for her coffee and looked away, but the message was clear. I wasn't entirely alone. When the conversation circled back to responsibility and pulling your weight, I stood. Not loud, not angry, just steady. "This will be the last time," I said, eyes on my father. "You ever use my name without permission?" Utensils stopped. A glass clinked softly against a plate. Dad's face didn't move, but his hand twitched near the napkin. Callista smirked again, but it was tighter this time. The corners of her mouth didn't quite rise the same way. I looked around the room and took in every face. They wanted to cash me out. I was just about to bankrupt their plans. By late afternoon, the light coming through the windows had turned pale and tired, stretching shadows along the carpet like long, quiet reminders of everything unspoken in that house. The tension had changed shape, no longer confrontational, not yet explosive, just brittle. I walked down the hallway past the study, my steps soft on the worn runner. The door was slightly ajar. I heard Callista's voice first, that crisp tone she always used when she was winning something. Mom murmured a reply. Curiosity, or maybe instinct, pulled me closer. Through the crack in the door, I saw a spread of documents on the desk. Maps, folders, and a laminated color-coded chart that looked too organized to be casual. I stepped in without knocking. Callista barely flinched. Mom looked up, startled. Working on the family portfolio? I asked lightly, eyes locked on the paper in her hand. Callista raised the chart. Estate planning, she said, like it was a casual brunch topic. The map displayed various properties, each one neatly labeled. Callista, Lake House. Dad, hunting cabin. Trust, main home. There was no mention of me, not even an initial, just a faded line in the bottom corner. Unassigned, contingent upon return. I raised an eyebrow. So I'm the clause now? Callista didn't answer. Mom shifted uncomfortably and began organizing the papers, like tidying them would change the truth. I left the room without another word. Back upstairs, I sat on the bed and pulled my laptop onto my knees. My hands moved fast, muscle memory kicking in from years of audit work. I logged into the old shared family email account, one we used long ago to organize house repairs and send photos. Apparently, someone had kept it alive. It didn't take long. The subject line was unmistakable. HELOC, signed, final. I opened the document. My name, my digital signature, dated 3 months ago. The problem was, I wasn't even in the country then. I was in Amsterdam at a conference, with hotel receipts and international logins to prove it. They didn't just lie, I whispered. They counterfeited me. The anger didn't rise like a flame. It settled low in my chest, cold and sharp. I picked up my phone and called Mia, my attorney back in Seattle. She picked up on the second ring. Mia, I said, steady. If a digitally forged signature is submitted to a bank, what are we talking about legally? Wire fraud, she answered without hesitation. Federal level. It's serious, Ven. I thanked her, sent over the file, and added, I need to know if this has touched any official channels. Already on it, she said. Get everything you can. Document it all. As I hung up, a new understanding sank in. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a witness. And maybe soon, a plaintiff. The smell of roasted turkey drifted upstairs, artificial and heavy. It was almost time for dinner. I washed my face, brushed my hair, and rejoined the performance. Downstairs, they were pouring wine like nothing had happened. My father greeted me with a nod as he handed out glasses. To family, he said, as though irony didn't exist. I sipped water. My smile was still intact, but something behind it had changed. I waited. Dinner went by in a blur. Forks clinked. Callista complimented the gravy. Mom passed the rolls. No one brought up the spreadsheet. No one mentioned the inheritance map. But my mind never left that email, that signature, that theft. After the dishes were cleared and the living room returned to its quiet, curated form, I got to work. Back in the kitchen, I printed 2 copies of the forged document. One I folded and tucked carefully beneath the underside of the kitchen table, using tape from the junk drawer. A place no one would look, unless they had something to hide. The other went back into my folder, now nearly an inch thick. In my room, I updated the file on my laptop, labeled it Exhibit A, and added a line to my digital notes. Tomorrow, I'll break the silence, but not the law. I set the alarm for 6:30. If they buried my name under papers, I'd bury their lies under proof. After dinner, I slipped away before the talk turned to games or whiskey. The house always changed after a meal. People got louder, more performative. I needed the opposite. The hallway near the office was dim, but not quiet. Muffled voices leaked through the cracked door. I paused, stepping lightly so my boots didn't announce me. Callista's voice first, confident, relaxed. We should file before the first of the year. If she can test anything, it'll look reactive. Then Dad, what about the condo? The paperwork's mostly done. We just need a clean transfer and someone to validate the new trust terms. The condo was mine. My heart didn't race. It slowed. Not with fear, just clarity. They weren't fighting me over values. They were fighting me for assets. This wasn't family. This was territory. I walked away before they could notice. Back through the kitchen, where Delphine was alone, pouring herself a second glass of wine. She raised an eyebrow as I entered. You all right? I nodded. She didn't believe it. She reached into her bag on the counter and pulled out a thin envelope. I wasn't sure when to show you this, she said, sliding it across. Inside was a faded copy of a property deed, my grandmother's land in Deer Park. My name, once printed cleanly under beneficiary, now scratched out in thick black pen. Delphine didn't look at me as she spoke. It was yours, until a few years ago. I swallowed. When? She shrugged. Ask your father why it vanished. The folder in my hands trembled, but I didn't let go. Why are you giving this to me now? Because your silence has never benefited you, and I'm done playing quiet. I left the kitchen. The hallway stretched longer than it had all week. In the den, Dad was reading, alone. I stood in the doorway, not asking permission. Were you planning to take the condo before or after the holidays? I asked. He didn't look up right away. When he did, it was with that tired expression he reserved for board meetings and marital tension. Everything stays in the family, he said. We're just correcting what you walked away from. That's not correction, I replied. That's conversion. His mouth twitched. It was your choice to leave. No, I said, stepping closer. It was your choice to replace me. Later that evening, Callista called a family update meeting in the living room. Lights were dimmed. A slideshow of past Christmases played on the TV. Soft music, smiling faces, laughter frozen in pixels. She stood near the fireplace, remote in hand. We've drafted a new family trust plan, she began. With Dad stepping back from financial oversight, it's important we secure the future. She clicked. Slide 1, a pie chart of property divisions. My name wasn't there. Slide 2, a timeline of estate transitions, no mention of me. Slide 3, a list of trustees. Guess who didn't make the cut? The room was quiet. No one said my name. No one looked at me. I let them finish. Then I stood, folder in hand. This, I said, holding up the deed Delphine gave me, used to have my name on it. I clicked my own flash drive into the TV and replaced Callista's chart with a scanned version of the scratched-out document. Audible gasps followed. And this, I added, opening my folder again, is your trust plan. Funny, my name's missing again. Callista's face froze in a half-smile. If anyone here thinks I'm walking away empty-handed, I continued, they better remember what's been filed and what's been forged. I locked eyes with her. For once, she blinked. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be the guest. I'd be the reckoning. Christmas morning came dressed in frost and false smiles. The kind of morning where the air felt too clean for the words that were about to be spoken. I moved through the kitchen slowly, deliberately, like someone not looking for confrontation, but refusing to avoid it anymore. The envelope was already in my hand. Plain, sealed, impersonal. I placed it on the breakfast table, right next to the folded napkins and the untouched cranberry loaf. Nobody reached for it. Callista looked at it first. Her fingers hovered, hesitated. She recognized the type of envelope. Legal, formal, dangerous. Inside, a printed email from a law firm, simple and direct. After an extensive review, we confirm that Ms. Vanessa Allery is not, and has never been, listed as a beneficiary in the current estate documents filed by Mr. and Mrs. Vexley. Dad kept buttering his toast like he hadn't heard it. Callista's face, however, was unreadable, except for the way her jaw flexed. You excluded me from the story, I said. No anger, just wait. So I'm rewriting it, with my name. Delphine, silent as always, stepped forward then. She set a small USB drive on the table, like it was nothing more than an after-dinner mint. You should all hear this, she said. She clicked her phone into the Bluetooth speaker they used for holiday jazz. What came next wasn't music. Dad's voice, scratchy and unfiltered, recorded years ago, probably never meant to leave his voicemail box. If Vanessa flakes, we've still got Callista. She's just backup. I didn't flinch, but it landed. The kind of sentence that changes a room forever. That's what I was? I asked. A contingency plan? Dad didn't answer, which, frankly, said more than a response ever could. Callista straightened her blouse. You never stayed long enough to earn that seat. I turned toward her, calm but absolute. And you stayed long enough to build a throne on my silence. The room split, not with words, but in postures. My uncle crossed his arms and leaned away. One cousin stood and moved behind Delphine. Another sipped her coffee, but she wouldn't meet Callista's eyes. The armor cracked. Nobody argued. I didn't gloat. Instead, I walked to my room. The suitcase was already half-packed. I didn't rush. I folded things with care. You don't make a dramatic exit when you know you're right. You make a deliberate one. Before leaving, I stopped by my father's office. I placed a document on his desk, a second copy of the fraudulent deed. A sticky note on top read, "This has been forwarded." On the outside of the folder, I taped a small Christmas card. Thank you for finally showing me everything I needed to see. Outside, the world felt too quiet. I could hear the soft crunch of ice as I stepped down the porch steps. The driveway was empty. Delphine had offered to take me to the airport. She pulled up just as I zipped my coat. No questions, just a nod. As we drove away, I looked back once. Not in sorrow, not in anger, in relief. By the time they realized I was serious, I was already gone. Seattle didn't welcome me back with warmth. It never did. But as I turned the key to my condo and pushed open the door, I felt something that almost resembled comfort. No holiday music playing, no scented pine candles, no laughter laced with sharpness. Just silence. I dropped my suitcase at the threshold and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet stretch over me. The walls were bare, no photos of family, no signs of tradition. Only the soft hum of the heater and the tick of the hallway clock. The silence here hurt less than their noise ever did. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and lit the small candle I kept on the counter. Not for mood, but for clarity. Some people journal, some scream into pillows. I light candles and watch them burn down to truth. 3 days passed like mist. I didn't answer most calls, didn't check my personal email until December 30th, when a new message appeared under Other. Subject line: Irregular activity. Documents under your name. The sender was a mid-level compliance officer from a bank I didn't recognize. My heart paused. Attached were scanned files, familiar ones. My forged signature on loan documents. The same ones I'd found buried in folders and drawers back in Spokane. But these had audit notations. Flags. Someone had noticed. The officer's message was short. You didn't get this from me, but you should talk to legal. I forwarded everything to Mia with a note. We were right. They filed it. She replied in minutes. I'll pull case law and prepare for subpoena. You've done more than enough. Just stay ready. I powered off the screen and stared out the window for a long while. Across the street, kids were setting up fireworks for New Year's. I thought about what this night used to mean. Hope. A clean slate. Champagne in someone else's kitchen while pretending family didn't weigh you down like cement. At 9:42 p.m., my phone rang. Mom. I let it buzz for a few seconds before answering. Her voice was tight, trembly. Not from tears, just panic. Your father's accounts. They're frozen, she said. The bank says there's an investigation. They mentioned your name. What? What's going on? I closed my eyes and exhaled. I don't know, Mom. Maybe start by telling the truth. Silence stretched across the line. Then the line went dead. I didn't call back. Midnight came with fireworks I didn't bother watching. I sat by the window with my tea, watching their reflections in the glass rather than the sky. I wasn't in the mood to look up at things meant to impress me. They called me selfish, I whispered to no one, but they took everything they could, until I had to lock the vault. A message came through from Mia. Bank's compliance team may issue subpoenas. You did good reporting. Now let it roll. I set the phone down and stood, stretching out the stiffness in my shoulders. For once, I wasn't waiting for anyone else to act. I wasn't anticipating a moment of grace or a confession or a change of heart. The wheels were already turning, and I'd given them the nudge they needed. On January 2nd, I walked past my office building, coffee in hand. No fanfare, no clean start. Just a quiet sense of being grounded. I didn't feel vindicated, not quite. But I felt real, present, clear. I paused at the corner, watching people move around me, laughing, texting, clutching paper cups in gloved hands. Control, I realized, isn't something you fight for. It's something you reclaim when you remember you had it all along. They wanted my silence. Instead, they got my signature on a statement of truth. The morning of January 3rd started like most others. I walked into my usual cafe on the corner of 5th and Union, ordered my coffee, and tapped my card against the reader. Declined. At first, I assumed it was a connection glitch. Then I tried again. Declined. Again. I smiled politely at the barista and stepped aside, phone already out. My banking app loaded slower than usual, as if it didn't want to deliver the punch. The joint account with my parents was gone. Not empty. Erased. Retroactively closed. I stared at the screen, heart not racing, but steady. Too steady. They hadn't just cut me off. They tried to erase me. Back at the condo, I sat in the kitchen with a pen in one hand and a blank legal pad in the other. My phone buzzed. Mia. Then we got a response, she said, no greeting. Your father's legal counsel is claiming you may have fabricated the documents yourself. My stomach didn't drop. It locked. They're preemptively accusing you of forging your own signature to undermine the weight of the charges. They submitted a memo suggesting you had the motive and technical access. She read it aloud. One sentence stood out. The disputed origin of signature appears to implicate familial party. They didn't just deny me. They criminalized me. My hands didn't shake, but I could feel the cold settle in behind my ribcage, the kind of cold that stays. Not from fear, but resolve. I have travel logs, Mia, I said. Timestamps. Email metadata. I wasn't even on this continent when those forms were submitted. Then we build our case from there, she replied. No negotiation, I said. No settlement. I want this on record, not buried. The rest of the day was spent pulling files. Hotel invoices from Amsterdam, a visa stamp from Schiphol Airport, email headers showing time zones that proved what they'd never thought I could prove. By late afternoon, I had 3 folders open and a document marked Exhibit B, already shared with Mia. That night, while eating leftovers and ignoring the news, my voicemail pinged. It was from Callista. Her voice, calm but rehearsed, filled the room. Vanessa, I think you're blowing this up. Can we not destroy the family over a misunderstanding? No one wants to take anything from you. I listened to it twice, didn't respond. I set the phone down slowly. The rage didn't rise, it sat still in my spine. I didn't destroy the family, I just refused to be the one holding up its rotten walls. The next day, I met a friend for tea. Her name was Lorraine, and she'd been through something not identical, but similar. Enough to know what silence tastes like when it coats your mouth for too long. As we sat by the window watching the fog roll over the sound, I spoke quietly. People think strength is about volume, but sometimes It's knowing when not to pick up the phone. She didn't reply. She just nodded. She understood. A text came in from Mia around 2 p.m. They're investigating your father's business accounts next. Might get messy. I exhaled and leaned back in my chair, the heat of the tea warming my hands. Their lies bought them silence for years. My truth? It's collecting interest. The call came just after 8 on a gray January morning. I was making oatmeal, stirring mindlessly as rain dotted the kitchen window. The phone buzzed on the counter, and for reasons I still don't fully understand, I answered. Vanessa, my mother's voice cracked softly. We were wondering if you could help us figure out how to keep the house. No apology, no acknowledgement, just the usual pattern, need disguised as connection. I didn't speak right away. I let the silence stretch until it became its own kind of reply. You're not calling your daughter, I finally said. You're calling your former asset. She didn't argue, just an exhale, hollow. I ended the call before she could shift into sentiment. That door didn't need slamming, it needed locking. That evening, I opened my journal. I hadn't written in it for weeks, but the pen felt steady in my hand now. I wrote not to record, but to remember what clarity felt like. Letting go didn't mean I'd lost. It meant I no longer wanted to win a game rigged from the start. There's dignity in walking away when the fight isn't worth your name anymore. The next day, I stopped by the neighborhood bookstore. The owner, Susan, looked up from behind the register and smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile that expects anything. It was the kind that simply says, "You're still here." You know, she said as I browsed, we've been thinking of hosting some weekend workshops, financial basics, credit literacy, that kind of thing. Would you be interested? I paused, thumb resting on the spine of a memoir. The irony didn't escape me. Yeah, I said. I think I'd like that. Maybe I couldn't salvage the family name, but I could teach others how not to sign theirs away so carelessly. Over the next few days, calls started coming in. Cousins, second cousins, neighbors. Some genuinely worried. Others just sniffing for gossip. A few tried to play neutral, testing the waters of forgiveness like dipping a toe in cold lake water. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I created a new voicemail message. Hi, this is Vanessa. If this call is about family drama, estate questions, or sudden rediscovered affections, please hang up. Forgiveness is free. Access isn't. On the evening of January 10th, I walked to the lake behind my building. The air bit through my coat, but I didn't mind. In my hands, I carried a sealed envelope. Inside were 3 things: a copy of the trust deed, the spreadsheet Callista had proudly shared that listed me as owed, and the family Christmas photo with me cropped out. I sat on the bench overlooking the water, watching ducks glide over the rippling surface. I didn't need to set the envelope on fire. I didn't need spectacle. I just needed release. I placed it gently on the water and watched it float, slowly, purposefully, until it began to sink. Not with drama, just with inevitability. Some stories don't need to end with reunion. Some just end. And that's enough. January 15th arrived not with drama, but with precision. The kind of morning where the sky doesn't shift from gray and the air hums with decisions waiting to be sealed. I dressed in black slacks, a navy blouse, no jewelry, no flair, just clarity. At 8:55 a.m., I logged into the video conference for the remote legal hearing from my condo's home office. The camera caught me centered, composed. I had tested the lighting an hour earlier. Everything was intentional. On the other side of the screen, their names lined up. Callista, Thurman, Laverne, all represented by lawyers with practiced faces. This wasn't family. It was litigation. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched low on her nose, called the hearing to order. The topic: forged loan documents and falsified estate filings. I was not there to accuse. I was there to confirm. When it was my turn to speak, I unfolded a paper and read, "I didn't come here to punish anyone. I came to protect the truth. My name has value, not because they gave it to me, but because I reclaimed it, and I will not allow it to be used again without consent." My voice didn't tremble. I didn't raise it. I didn't need to. The judge listened quietly, her eyes not leaving mine once. When she delivered her decision, it was with that same calm authority. A full audit of my father's trust, restitution for damages to my credit, referral to the district attorney's office for criminal review. I exhaled, not with triumph, but with closure. My attorney leaned in slightly to the screen and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "You didn't just win a case. You rewrote a history they thought they owned." That night, I sat at my desk with a pen and thick stationery. I addressed a letter to my parents. Inside, I placed 3 things: a copy of the judgment, a revised estate document, with their names removed, and a note that read, "This is what accountability looks like. I no longer owe you silence." I sealed the letter, then placed it, not in a mailbox, but in a fireproof envelope stored in a drawer labeled Legacy. It wasn't to send, it was to own. A few days later, I walked through the city alone. It was raining, not heavily, but steadily. I passed my old high school, then my favorite bakery, and eventually found myself at the community college campus. Inside, I signed up to volunteer, offering mentorship for young women navigating financial systems, legal basics, power of attorney documents. I knew what it felt like to be blindsided by fine print written in familial tones. She doesn't need to be chosen anymore, I thought as I caught my reflection in a rain-streaked window. She just needed to choose herself. A month later, I was invited to join a podcast on financial trauma and family betrayal. I didn't say much at first. I let others speak. But when it came to the final segment, I closed with this: family isn't who names you, it's who respects your name. And when I logged off that recording, I didn't feel heavy. I felt like something had returned to me. Something mine, maybe for the first time. They tried to write me out of everything. I made sure my name ended up in the only place that mattered: my own story. Not every legacy is inherited. Some are built, with grit, scars, and your own damn name.